this group of people that I'm a part of, experts in investigations of mostly complicated sexual assault cases, has learned us to look very critically at the way that these investigations are done, because they're complicated, sometimes even often. Not the correct procedures are being used, mistakes are being made in investigations, and of course that is at the expense of the result that's coming from it, because if the investigation is not properly done, the result might be that those who are guilty will not be convicted because there's not enough evidence or it was not obtained in the proper way. Now, if you're critical, especially in law enforcement, people don't always look at you as, oh, what a wonderful guy, he's got all this stuff he has to say about what we've done wrong. But you have to realize that with everything I'm talking today, we're doing this from the angle that if you tell people how to do a better job, in the end, you will have better investigations and you will have better results of all your hard work that you've put into it. There's actually, I don't think any other crime that so many countries in this world and this day and age have worked together on to kind of get a similar definition of what human trafficking is all about and how we should fight it and how we should investigate it as law enforcement. We're still going to see some differences because countries have used similar but not exactly the same wording depending on, for instance, their own national laws that also had to be looked at. So there's a lot of similarity into what the law in Argentina says about what human trafficking is, and of course that it's illegal, it's a crime, as it is in my country. Most victims, obviously, especially in this kind of case, will have suffered through some usually horrendous experiences and sometimes over a prolonged period of time. This goes for, by the way, all cases that we as law enforcement need to deal with. Victims deserve our respect and our empathy, so we have to treat them as human beings, and at the same time we may feel sorry for them because of what happened. Now that's a completely logical feeling that you may have even as a police officer, but as difficult as it may be, feeling sorry for the victim is not going to help you investigate. You have to be professional in your investigation, and you have to ask very difficult questions about sometimes very intimate situations that a victim may have gone through over time. You can explain this kind of thing to a victim, that you have to ask those questions. This will also go for instance, a victim of rape that we're dealing with as police officers. You have to ask questions about what the rapist has exactly done to her in order to be able to show in court that this was a criminal offense and what happened. Sometimes this is hard. Police officers find it hard, victims find it hard. But if you manage to get through this, if you explain it to the victim, in the end, if the result is that the attacker is going to be convicted, this could be a very helpful step in getting back to some kind of normalization of the situation and no longer necessarily feeling a victim anymore, but seeing this as a kind of victory over what happened to you. People that have become victims of crime, and especially sexual crimes, may feel ashamed of what has happened to them, but also what they have done. They contribute the cause of what happened to themselves. They feel responsible for what happened. They should have done things differently, is what they feel. Whether that's true or not is a different story. The conditions under which they lived in, sometimes we see that this kind of thing may go together with an addiction to drugs, which is explainable by the fact that you have to go through some stuff, and drugs may help you out in kind of not being in it all the time, like an escape. Sometimes, due to the circumstances and the people that are actually forcing you to do this, You may be committing crimes yourself being a victim, which is another complicating issue if you get in touch with law enforcement, because of course the first thing we're going to say is, hey, but you did something yourself that is not allowed under the law, and how are we going to explain this? How are we going to deal with this? Are we going to put you in jail too when you're the victim? There's of course the issue of immigration, because if you've been trafficked across a border into another country, you may have entered illegally there, which is another reason for problematic situations. Because an immigration officer may say, well, that's all wonderful, you have a victim of human trafficking, but she got into the country illegally and it's my job to throw her out again. And of course that's not a situation that you want at that time, because if the victim is back to her own country, who's going to help you to make your case? And just as an example, because that will cover some of the things that I've talked about, and I'll read it to you and the translators will tell you what it says. This is the literal words from a victim statement in a human trafficking investigation. She said, John took me to see his friend's house in Rotterdam, which is in the Netherlands. When we arrived there, 4 persons were present, John's friend and 3 other males. They all raped me during the night that followed. And then she continues, the next morning, John and I drove back to Amsterdam and stopped for some groceries on the way home. Okay, well, the vital sentence in all of this is, they all raped me during the night that followed. But if I would ask all of you to kind of write down what you think happened during that night, I'm going to have I'm not sure there's about 100 of you, I'm going to have 100 different versions of what you think that might have happened to this victim being raped by 4 males. So we can assume that it was rape, and we can assume that it was a pretty bad experience, but we need to have details, and we need to ask those difficult questions that I mentioned earlier, getting those details and getting, for all those guys, all their own responsibilities and their own actions distinguished between the 4 of them, because the law doesn't accept that you do something together and you'll all be convicted the same way. You'll need to have the individual activity for each of the offenders involved in order to be able to prosecute and convict them. So the victim will have to explain that person 1 did this, person 2 did that, person 3 did maybe very little or nothing, and person 4 did so-and-so. And only if you've got that detail covered, you will be able to move on with this case. In the past, when we talked about our children and them being out there on the street before there was internet, we were kind of afraid that they were going to run into the wrong person, meet the wrong person on the street, and we call this the stranger danger situation. In the last couple of years, we have learned that we may have overemphasized that, overstated that. The chances of your child, your children, being abducted on the street by some stranger are very, very, very small. We could kind of get into the same situation now with human trafficking. We could think, okay, well, our children are not in danger of strangers on the street anymore. It's become human trafficking now in any way, shape, or form. Whether that is true or not, we really don't know, and Katja is going to talk about that further, but we have to realize that children and sometimes even adults are not careful on the internet and how they use it and what kind of information they share there. So if we want to help ourselves and help our children, the best thing to do is to make children aware of the possible dangers that are out there. Start teaching them that responsibility at a very young age, and then we can see where we end up.